Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and today I wanted to just really quickly talk about cocoon nurseries, like the one that I've got going on in this black fabric bag. Some of my cocoon nurseries get a fair bit of airplay. This one here I think was featured in a video a day or two ago. We've got other ones too, other systems that are serving cocoon nursery functions, but they're set up a little differently. Here I'm actually kind of doing this cocoon nursery in place sort of setup. So the old castings with the cocoons are left over on the dry side with the paper, and over here on the damp side we try to lure the worms out. So it's just a little kind of a experiment where I still treat that as sort of a cocoon nursery style environment. Over here too, the shallow tub, cocoons, well, you know, castings basically, with the assumption that there's cocoons in them, and there usually are, and at some point in the future we're going to have to round those baby worms up, and it depends on how much time, I guess. And in the case of this one over here, the last one, this is the one that we're going to be focusing on today. These are the castings that were harvested out of my compost barrel. And that was quite some time ago, 132 days ago at this point. You know what? I got a diagram. Why don't I show you? A number of events that track back to the history of this package of castings were featured in videos I prepared, such as the video in which we actually did pull out all the material from the compost barrel, make the necessary repairs to the compost barrel, and then return a bunch of materials to it, which still needed a lot of time to break down, but all those materials that were already very heavily broken down were placed into 3 fabric grow bags, and they were just given time to dry. They were brought down here into my basement. Just for safety's sake, they were put in paper bags, left time to dry. It was something like 44 days, I believe, before we started poking into those bags, try to distill their contents down into 2 items. One of those items is what you see here. It's all the stuff that's in this bag here. It's the castings, right? But we did actually separate worms. I went in there on 3 separate occasions to process the separation of the worms from the material in each of these 3 separate systems, and over the course of maybe 9 days I got done with all 3 of these. The worms were used to launch off a kind of a guest bin where I've got worms living in this system, but they're kind of here on a conditional system. The idea was that maybe at some point those worms would actually get moved back outside. I don't know, they might end up staying down here, we'll see. But we were also left with castings assumed to have a bunch of cocoons in them, and at this point it's also a matter of trying to round up the worms from this stuff too. So one of my viewers made a comment when I had set up one of these baiting stations once, saying that they thought they were going to see the outcome of what the baiting station was trying to accomplish, not just the setup of the baiting station, and that made a lot of sense. So I figured I'd reverse it this time. I wouldn't even make a video of the setup of the baiting station. We would just come back in here after a certain period of time to see how it's done. And in this case, it's been 14 days since we set up this base. Well, I set it up. It wasn't we, because I didn't make a video about it. I just came down here one day, and I wanted to follow the suggestion that I saw on the Vermibag website. That guy Tom that runs the Vermibag company, he created this baiting station basically out of nothing more than bedding. And I don't know his exact recipe for bedding. Maybe his bedding's got some worm chow in it and some goodies to bring the worms in, drive the worms bananas. I don't remember if I had just thrown kind of vanilla boring bedding in here or if I spiced it up with something. I think it might have just been boring bedding, although I could have just as easily thrown in a little bit of food, a little bit of, you know, worm chow, a little something to sweeten the deal. But you know what? I'm not really here to haul the worms out. I'm just here to see how this is doing after 14 days, because I've not so much as taken a peek in here. And I want to see if it's doing well. If it is, I want to, you know, help it along to continue to do well. If it's not doing well, then we can abandon this now and come up with some other way to get the worms out of this stuff. So, you know what? I'll be right back. What we could do is we could pour out the contents of this just so we could see what's in here. But before we do that even, might make good sense just to kind of excavate the material right there in the immediate vicinity of the bait box, right near the openings on the bottom. Maybe that's really where the wormies are hanging out. So let's see if that's the case in the first wave here of checking into the progress of this whole thing. There's a worm here. I guess I'll just drop them in the bait box if I find them, right? No sense in finding them and then just sort of moving on. just throw them in the bait box. That's where we'd like our worms to collect anyway, and if there's only one in all this, I'd be a little bit surprised. Could that be? Well, I don't know. I'm not really sure what to expect in here. It's been, geez, I had a whole bunch of information here, right? It's been a long time. Plenty of time now, you know? Even if you go back to the point in time 88 days ago when we separated the worms from these castings, then we, you know, technically at that point had no more inhabitants of this material that would be capable of creating any new cocoons. Those 88 days should have been more than enough to allow for any cocoons to have hatched, and even for that matter, for some of those wormies to have grown to a decent size too, you know? So maybe I just need to pick a little bit deeper. Maybe I just didn't go down far enough. It did seem like if I poked around a little bit further, I would find a few worms suddenly. And there they are. A couple more. Here again, it's not a haul out. It's really just sort of a status check and maybe a reinforcement of moisture, reinforcement of food, bedding, whatever it is that might be needed to help this baiting station proceed as planned, assuming we're satisfied with the performance so far, and we're going to let it continue. And I see no reason to pull the plug yet, but we haven't really checked the bait box yet. We're just checking the surrounding materials. I really don't know what to expect from this material, you know. I definitely expect lots of little worms. I just don't know how little. You know, there's a good number of them. Most of the ones I've pulled out have been little ones. Some of them look like they might already be approaching that age where they're old enough to mate, you know. If within that 88 days we've actually reached that point where some of the oldest of the bunch that were born way in the beginning are now old enough to have possibly mated as well, now we're sort of, you know, complicating the matter. Now it's like, well, which cocoons are we going to wait for? Which ones aren't we going to wait for? Any ones that were just very recently deposited into the material by some of the new youngsters that have just become mature enough to mate, those we would not want to wait for at this point. But any ones that were in the material, any cocoons that were in the material 88 days ago or prior, it'd be nice to, you know, round up those worms from the stuff. And if our bait box is effective, it could be a pretty easy process. And then it'll be really nice to put this material to good use out in the garden, because this is some really nice stuff that comes out of my, this is different, you know. To me at least, this is a little bit different from the material I usually deal with, because this stuff's, you know, aged for years. It's been getting broken down by not just worms, by a variety of different types of creatures. Like I said, over years, you know. So to me, it just somehow seems like this is some sort of supercharged stuff, you know. This is some sort of special castings that don't just come out of one of my vermi bins, but this is the stuff that came out of my many-year-old compost barrel. And the stuff really is super duper looking, you know. It's super dark and rich, and I got a feeling the plants are going to really like it. But, you know, like I said, I'm not going to go bananas trying to pick every worm out of this material. I guess we could just till around a little bit more. If we spot one or two more, we can just help them join the party over there in the bait box. I'd like to really just dump this plastic container out now and get the contents of the bait box out so we could see what that looks like. That's what I'm curious of. So here's another wormy. Let's help him get over there where the party's happening. And we'll see what we can do about making the party even more interesting. Try to, you know, lure even more creatures over here. More wormies out of the compost to join the party. Yeah, there's worms all over the place in this stuff, you know. Maybe we'll do a little bit of baiting for a while, but then I'm starting to wonder if some other process might be more efficient at getting the worms out of here. Some sort of a light harvesting, or, you know, drive the worms down through the material with bright lights. But this is a lot of material, so it would take some time to skim all this stuff off and gradually work the inhabitants down into a pile on the bottom. So I'll have to give that some more thought, but I would obviously like to, you know, avoid doing it that way if I could. Perhaps put all this stuff into one of my larger size bins and initiate a horizontal migration, and then leave it uncovered so it could just start drying and become less and less hospitable for the worms to stay in. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. I think doing it in a bin, a box, would be a little easier than doing it here within this bag. So, all right, let's let's ditch this stuff here. Get it back down in here. Thought I saw a big worm. No? Was I imagining? When I watch the video, I'll see all the ones that I missed. Alrighty. So, let's set the stage for this. Tidy up our little exploration. Another thing I was always doing in these systems is periodically visiting them to make sure that there was ample moisture coming in with the spray bottle, spraying them down. But these systems are now kind of being left on their own to become a little bit more dry out on the perimeter, along the walls of the fabric. The center, the core of this thing is going to be nice and damp, and that's where all the worms are going to gravitate towards. So I think it'll make it really easy to fish through the dry stuff on the outskirts. Maybe you'll find a worm or two, but for the most part you'll be able to burn right through checking this stuff on the outer sides, and then maybe a little bit more time consuming to you know, work the worms out of the material that's in the center, nice and damp and cozy, where all the worms are going to start gravitating towards as it continues to dry on the outskirts. Alright, let's bring this box back over and check out what's happening here. What's on the bottom here? I might have to refresh my memory because I don't recall quite what had happened here. It seems like this is just a piece of newspaper. I'm just trying to refresh my memory if there was something other than bedding put in here. I think I was really trying to keep to that suggestion that I saw on the Vermibag YouTube channel, where it was, I believe it was just bedding only, used to round up all the worms in a Vermibag tote. Seemed to lure all the worms over into itself and left the finished castings completely worm free within, I believe, a couple weeks, within 3 weeks or so. So this shredded paper is not the easiest stuff to spot worms in, you know, because the colors kind of match. Sometimes if you just kind of, you know, sit and stare, you might see the stuff in here moving a little bit. But you know what? I think I'm going to get something other than just bedding. I think we're going to go with a little bit something more delicious. Get something from my freezer to include in here. I'll put some chow in here. We'll dampen it nicely. Maybe a little bit more of this shredded paper. But I'd also like to sweeten the deal and make it even more interesting for the worms to come on over and party here. So let's take a short break, or maybe I'll just let the camera roll on these little guys for a moment or two while I get them something to set this up with. This stuff here looks like it's full of mites too, isn't it? I don't know, I can't tell. All right, let me run to the kitchen. I'll be right back. Here's what I bought down for these little guys. Stuff that's not yet made its way into the freezer. It's the, let's see, there's the butt end of a cucumber, as well as a few of its peels, as well as the butt end of a head of romaine lettuce, plus a couple of its less appealing leaves. And this is just the piece of paper towel that was resting on top of this whole baiting station. So yeah, I believe that those are mites, right? So none of this stuff is frozen. I think it shouldn't be a problem just blending it in here. You know, there's all kinds of good bedding in here now. There's going to be all kinds of yummy foods to go with it. I don't know if there's any importance to keeping this as a large chunk. Perhaps it's better to break it apart into little pieces. And then, I don't know if there's really a need for it or not, but some of these worms, who knows, babies, right, could be craving some grit. So I don't remember if any grit's been given. Maybe this is what ends up really attracting them, right? The other thing I'm kind of tossing in here is a little bit of my worm chow. Again, I don't remember if I added anything other than paper last time. I believe paper was the pretty much sole ingredient. And I think we're going to cram it all right back into that little box. Hopefully it fits. Worms and all. That's kind of the other reason I'm glad I didn't, you know, bring frozen foods down here for them. Grabbed a few things that were fresh, just so that we're not cramming a bunch of little wormies that are inhabiting this neighboring material into to a little ice box into freezing zone. Wouldn't be fun for them, I'm sure. So let's see how we get all this back in here. Yay! I'm trying so hard not to make a big mess. I did not succeed. Alright, you know what? We can clean up if we make a mess. Let's get this job done, right? What do we got here? Any other wormies left behind? Bunch of eggshell. We've also got a little bit of other stuff that all fell apart here. We're going to be digging a hole for these little guys. It just would have been kind of nice to not litter these really fine castings with all kinds of chunks of paper and whatnot. Not that it's such a big deal, but still, just from the prettiness perspective, they are nice castings, you got to admit. Kind of nice not to have a bunch of stuff making it look sloppy. Now there's one other thing that I want to include here, but let's get this thing situated down into a nice little hole here. I'd also like to kind of cram this a little bit. Apologies to the little wormies that are getting a little bit more pressure than they were bargaining for here. I guess we'll try to put this cover thingy back on again like we had it prior. Alright, so I don't know how much longer to let this keep going, but you know, at some point we'll just have to say that's that. And then maybe just do a quick skim through the material, pick out a few worms, but then just accept the fact that maybe when it comes time to give this stuff to the plants out in the garden, they're going to get a few worms along for the deal too. Not that that's a big deal or a problem. In fact, it might to a certain degree serve as a benefit, but alright, we're not really trying to hit any sort of goals or objectives here, so I shouldn't be so particular about the details. Let's just get this job done. It's just another little guy who was left behind in the tray. I'll take another closer look just to make sure I didn't leave anyone behind. I wouldn't want to strand anybody. And alright, let's stop picking worms. Fun stuff. So yeah, I don't know what to expect. You know, this is a pretty large container, and my little baiting station here is pretty minuscule relative to the, you know, just the general amount of volume surrounding it, in which there could be worms that we're trying to attract over and get, you know, not only attract them over, but keep them comfortable and convince them to stay. Who knows, maybe as things dry out, maybe the one thing that's going to be the most appealing is dampness, and keeping all this paper nice and wet might really be the magic ingredient to get the optimal turnout here. So as a finishing touch, we're bringing in a little bit of this Mosquito Dunks solution, BTI. The BTI is just going to help me deal with some of my little flying mosquito situations that are going on down here in some of my bins. I don't believe that this system is one of the ones that are affected, luckily, but I wouldn't want them to move in here, find that there's a nice cozy spot to hang out. If they do, then their larvae will never survive with that BTI around. Alright, so one of my lesser checked in on systems here, kind of an off the books system for that matter. And I guess we'll see how this does, you know. 2 weeks in progress. It looked like it was collecting up some worms. It also looked like there was quite a bit of worms still out in the material. So we'll let this continue as is for a while. Check in on it again in the future. But for now, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.